again, welcome to the CTBUH Florida presentation today. The webinar is called Timber on the Rise from Paris to Miami. I'm Christophe Bilaine, the chair of CTBUH Florida, actually co-chair with Danilo Nani. And it's our pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar and trying to give you a little bit of a perspective on how we can use timber in construction around the globe and what are the CTBUH efforts that are done in multiple entities. And today we've gathered a great group of people to give you this perspective. So I'll try to move to the next slide. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so today we decided to take you on a journey. With COVID, we've all been stuck with the traveling policies, and so we decided to take you on a journey and give you a little bit of a perspective on what has been done by the CTBUH Timber Special Group and our French chapter, Ariane Dienstag, who is leading the chapter as a corporate secretary. And as a founding member of CTBUH will take us through the progress of this group. I think it's going to be extremely interesting to get this perspective. And then we will have a case study presented by Philippe Monjaret of architects Hardel Bihan about a mixed-use project design with some timber structure. And then we'll cross the ocean and come to Miami for the presentation by Shawna Meyer and Chris Meyer from the Littoral Urbanism Lab of the University of Miami, and what are the strategy for wood and Miami first CLT structure. And then we will conclude by a Bouygues group presentation of their global portfolio in terms of timber building, which I will try to present quickly. And I'll be happy to open to some questions. Actually, some housekeeping discussion. I'd like to mention that this webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to access the link on the CTBUH website after this presentation. And also you have access to a Q&A box on the Zoom chat, so you can raise your questions as the presentation go, and then we'll go back and we'll take all the questions at the end of the presentations. So just a quick introduction now on the Continental Building and Urban Habitat globally that was founded about more than 50 years ago. And it's a non-profit, multidisciplinary, worldwide trade association focused on tall buildings and sustainability. It's directed to vertical urbanism and also urban habitat as well. And this group gathers more than 2 million people globally. And I found it's a very fascinating group with a lot of experts and individuals contributing to sharing information throughout the world with a number of a good cross-section, I would say, of professionals, either by region, as you can see on this graph, or by expertise and fields, like it gathers architects, engineers, contractors, and all owners, of course, and developers, and a multitude of experts in their field. So it's a great group for real estate development at large and construction. CTBUH entertains a number of annual competitions, which you can see on the screen, mostly geared toward design, trying to raise awareness about tall buildings, urban habitat for students and for professionals. So I encourage you to participate to those competitions. As you can see, the array of members is probably as vast as the globe, but you see here some of the major developers and operators and contributors to this group. And of course, like I said before, a global presence with 13 regional chapters, including Miami, which is today the center of this presentation. And but we have the pleasure to have Ariane from our French chapter today. So welcome to our European colleagues as well today. As far as the CTBUH Florida chapter goes, like I said, I've been co-chairing this group with Danilo Nali for a few years, and Dean, Warhaf, Marco Di Renzo, and Mindy Swaritz are also on the CTBUH committee, and we are supported by the Young Professional Leaders Group. Santiago is with us today, Valeria, and Ari, Sergio, and George are also very active in preparing those events. So thank you so much to this group as well for their daily contribution to the chapter. And with that, we'll leave it to Ariane, who's going to talk to us about the CTBUH Timber Group and what are the initiatives that have been done, especially with the French chapter. Ariane? You're on mute. While you're on mute, maybe I'll unmute Ariane, please. And so Ariane is a very talented architect. She's been owning her own firm for a few years. She's worked on multiple very large projects.
Activate. I think everything is okay. You can see me and you can hear me. Perfect. I was just saying that climate change was important. And then, as I said, even though it's the winter, the heat is very important. In the north of France, in Bihan, you had already winter gone and summer there with blooming of the spring. Construction also was very interesting to notice in Bihan with a mix of stone construction and for sure wood construction. That is our topic today. And this introduces the topic itself. Anthony Wood, the CEO of the CTBUH, was just underlying that into a congress in Shenzhen some years ago, I think 2 years ago, where he was stressing the fact that people were moving into cities, so density was required. The second point is that the surface and areas where we will be invited to leave or obliged to leave in the coming centuries, I hope, or coming years, decades, will be reduced and limited, and that the change of climate will lead us to organize our areas and living areas differently. When you add all the changes we are facing, hurricanes, sea level rise, temperature changing, water stress, we are looking at a planet that will give really, really small pockets where people will be. So carbon footprint will be one major issue, density will be a major issue, and good condition for life will be also something to consider seriously. Wood might be, not the only one, but might be good components to build the city that we will need to organize. The CTBUH has not been working on that only a few years ago, but since quite a long time, and has launched a timber research last year in August 2020. And it was important to position French studies in that, where I believe we are doing things quite interesting. So we'll just present quickly what is the consistence of this research. As I said, many topics have been already organized around timber by the CTBUH with a listing of existing projects, publications, reviews, and things like this. Survey of codes, evolutions, regulations, new buildings, a little bit everywhere around the planet. So it's really a way of being knowledge of everything what is doing around the world in this industry. It looked For finance, some 2 years ago, because this is the way I get informed of this study. And in August 2020, started the research funded and financed by the USDA and also the Forest Services, together with the Binational Softwood Lumber Council in Canada, and with the support of the Illinois Institute of Technology, the University of Venice, and at least at the University of Tianjin in Shanghai. The kickoff meeting took place last October with lots of people coming from everywhere, many countries, but also many industries. And the idea was to really cover the industry in all its dimensions. Jeff Spiritus, I'm sure is listening to the session right now, is heading well, I was the heading, yeah, is really involved in the process and pushing in many directions what we're doing. It is organized with 6 subgroups, funders, owners, developers, the structural engineering, materials, and embodied energy. Very important aspects with the codes and regulation, incentives, and France has something to say in that, especially I think incentives is something that we need to push on our side. Architecture, interiors and facade, construction, logistics and supply chain, MEP, fire and acoustics. And for sure there are other topics such as education, sustainability, traceability, many other things are coming and will be discussed, but it is organized this way. The objective of the study is first a kind of audit of what is done in the best practice everywhere. Then to study cases in the world. The topic will be 8-level minimum for the building studied at a certain stage of development, not under study only, but mostly after building permit or under construction, and have a guide edited. Then the second phase will be to consider by altogether how a city could be organized with that, organize a database, and then really go into I will say the business part of it to push the decision maker to move ahead and change things. Just to give you an idea, the guides are, I will say nearly every year, it's nearly every year, edited from the CTBUH, very specific topics. The wood and timber one will be one of those. An example was the green wall in high-rise buildings, and it gives you how in detail it goes with very specific explanation on details and projects selected for their quality and how they can push the industry in a way. 66 projects have been selected now. There are 7 from France, and I must say they are completed or nearly about to be completed for the one listed there. But they are, as you can see, from Toronto, Melbourne, everywhere around the world. That will be, those will be registered and listed in the Skyscrapers Center under a very specific format. And for your information, it is organized for the moment under several type of way of studying the things, such as the location, the structure type, the function. And Will Miranda is in charge of coordinating all that with the different countries. Now the French chapter in 2 words. It has been organized a year ago, set it up from scratch with people from the real estate world, like Edouard Woods, engineering, like Peter Terrel or Jean-Marc Gégère with CTBUH. It's quite interesting or funny, I would say, to say that we have Edouard Woods on one side and Anthony Wood on the other, launching a study in wood. Anyway, we are doing visits of buildings, lectures, conference, meetings, and for sure, we set up a wood committee to address all the topics of the research. Now, it was interesting to organize this committee in wood because indeed, in France, many things are happening. We're not the only one for sure, and we started, I think, very late in comparison to other countries in Europe, such as Germany or Norway. But the Plan Climat, les Accords de Paris in 2015, were extremely pushing the industry in France. Pushing with some special funds for communication around wood. And for instance, we have 10 million invested over 3 years for the promotion of the wood construction in all its fields. A movie in the cinemas, as on TV, for advertising, on the radio, on the press. So there was a very strong campaign to promote wood in many ways. Another way to support the timber and construction is the labels and certifications. There are many starting to emerge since 2009, sorry. And in fact, the regulations are going more and more to low carbon footprint. And indeed, if wood is not the only process, it's really driving to that direction. The public policies and supports are also extremely strong. For instance, you got this famous French organization of the territory with regions, and at each level you have this possibility of pushing some way of building. The EPA, les établissements publics d'aménagement, are some public entity organizing competitions. And today, many of the competition organized in the public sectors are only addressing to wood process. A second thing is all the financial support the contractors or architects and designers can get. Financial loans, public grants, advance credit are part of those. Acceleration of legal processes like the building permits, like researches on seismic regulations, things like this are also part of the process. And finally, to push the industry and facilitate the contractor and developers and investors to go in that direction, the prices of land are extremely attractive to help the promotion of the process of the wood construction. An example is the Île-de-France. In Île-de-France, which is a region in France, englobing 12 million inhabitants, so something like 1/6 of the French population, you have a real mix of public actors, investors, developers, contractors, those that are engaged themselves, commit themselves to develop 1,200,000 square meters of wood construction in the next coming 5 years. It's really significant. So you have the public planners, the social landlords, the real estate developers, and behind the public communities. Those are really pushing the process. With a wood pact, a biosource wood pact that has been signed, and many association, non-profitable entities pushing also the sectors like the FCBA, the BBCA, all are entities supporting wood construction. It's very strong. An example of that is the Olympic Village that will be delivered for the 2024 Olympic Games, where the engagement has been taken to develop 50% of the building in wood, with facades, with a number of cubic meters, and many building permits have been delivered this month of last July, sorry, that will be indeed with wood major components. Another example will be l'Établissement Public, the national interest operation of Euratlantique, which also commits itself to develop in the 20 coming years, the majority of the development in wood. And it started with the first building in 2011. We are midway right now in 2020, and going from commitment to develop 25,000 square meters of wood buildings per year. So something like 10% of the project done. Very significant buildings like Hyperion or Silva. And now a whole district with the Armagnac district that will be mainly built with wood buildings. Another one by a private developer, Videon, together with BNP Real Estate, have developed 137,000 square meters of wood. Starting now, it's under construction this month in the north of Paris, in the west, behind the CBD of Paris with the Arboretum. The last one, another one, sorry, is the Sensation in Strasbourg with Bouygues as real estate developer. Another one will be the Nantes, La Canopée. And in Toulouse, you have Woodhart, for example, and Philippe will present you other ones. Those were developed with Hardel Le Bihan. To finish the presentation, it's not only the wood construction that is involved in the process, it's a whole supply chain. And it means also the infrastructure, the innovation, the logistic, the new tools that will be coming with that. And I wanted to finish on that picture where some airships are under construction right now, I think already operating, carrying something like 60 tons of wood. Those are major elements to access to places very difficult for access right now in the Far West. But I'll give you an idea of how far the innovation can go and how impacting this construction will be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ariane. And I guess I see we're running a little bit late, so without further ado, I'll give it to Philippe Monjaret of Architects Hardel Le Bihan in Paris. Philippe is the architect on the wonderful mixed-use project just outside Paris, and he's going to take us to this project and this great case study how they've been, pushing the boundaries to design this project. So Philippe, take it away.
Yes. Do you hear me well? Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi everyone. Thank you for having us today. Today I'd like to take you through on behalf of Hardel Le Bihan through some of our experience in the projects we've been working on. Some of them are on site, others still in planning application. So we're going to talk about timber on the rise from Paris to Miami from our perspective. Starting within 2006, a completed operation, which was one of the first of the kind, which is a CLT roof extension, small scale, but we still had to face only on limited load capacity with the existing building. Just moving on. Sorry. Another one, which is a bit higher, is a workers' housing on top of Paris Ring Road. This one was interesting because we had to sit on top of an existing bridge on top of the Ring Road, and therefore we had to face the same load capacities as well. Basically, it helped to have timber on the project, and also we had to deal with bracing issues, which we faced with steel-framed structure. So I'm just going to place something elsewhere because it's right in the middle. Sorry, here we go. This one is undergoing planning application. Mm-hmm. Not any higher, but still important in size, is an office building in Monjaret in Paris. This one is interesting because we have full timber structure apart from a very limited concrete core of the lifts mainly. And the main constraint here was the floor-to-ceiling height due to urban constraints, which had a big impact on the mini distribution of the floor plates. The curtain walling as well is made of timber, so we really tried to make our best to increase the use of timber in the space. Rising, getting higher with Albizia, which is a tower, a 50-meter high tower in Lyon, which is part of a timber frame block we're doing with other architects. This one is a mixed-use office and housing building. The top part is composed of housing floors sitting on top of a concrete base, hosting retail and offices spaces. The core is still in concrete for bracing reasons again. The cladding is made of concrete, so it's hardly that you can see that there is timber on the project. We used to have exposed timber on the balconies. It doesn't happen anymore due to second thoughts of the firemen. So now everything is encapsulated and invisible, and there's no sprinklage. Here you see where the timber is in the project. It's quite unusual to support timber, concrete cladding with timber, but it's what we have to do. Now we're getting to the main subject, which is the Bruneseau Seine district. Sometimes we talk about the Bruneseau Seine Tower, which is actually only one of the projects hosted within this district. It's a new Parisian neighborhood, which is about 100,000 square meters. So it's quite huge as a consultation process for CMAPA, which is the developer there, taking care of the area. It's hosting offices, housing, sport retail, public spaces, and it includes 3 towers. It's undergoing planning application as well. Hardel architects are coordinator and architect of the neighborhood, with Youssef Tomé, Ajay associate that you might know in the States, and Bruneseau Spinelli as well. Each of us actually work on different separate projects. What's interesting to see here is that we have a common language, and it's really about working with urban habitat and urban fabric with emergencies, all the system being articulated to infrastructure. The structure is mainly timber CLT slabs supported by primary concrete structure, core, columns, and beams. The cladding again is made of concrete. We do have one exception, which is one of the small emergencies, which is composed of a stone structure. So Seine Tower is designed by Jay Associates. It's the one on the left, 100 meter high, mainly housing. Most of the floors are timber CLT slabs. So it's quite a feat to do that in France, because the regulation doesn't allow for any combustible material within the 5 compartments. So we had to find new strategies. I'm not going to develop that now, but just later on. Most of the floors again are in timber. The exception are a few concrete floors in the base of the tower due to flood levels, and also around the plant rooms for fire reasons and load constraints as well. On the right-hand side of this image, you can see the B1D1 tower, which is just in front of the duo towers done by Hardel. The B1D1 tower is actually 2 towers in one. The left-hand side here that you can see in section is mainly taken care of by Youssef Tomé, and the right-hand side is composed of offices that we are taking care of within Hardel Bihan. It's really a 2-hand project. We designed the whole volumetry and architecture, both Hardel Bihan and Youssef Tomé, and it's only an organization process to deal with some of the programs separately. The design is a shared design. What you can see in the section is a spread and location of CLT slabs and concrete slabs. What's interesting in this B1D1 tower is that on the residential part, the top part was accessible housing. Used to be CLT and was turned to concrete slabs for basically maintenance and ownership rights issues to access the encapsulation and sprinklage systems. So only the managed student housing at the bottom of the residential part was maintained in CLT. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you have the offices which were made of hybrid concrete and timber slabs, which was switched to CLT slabs, which enables to overall balance the carbon footprint and timber volume used in the project. So we actually have more timber volume and carbon stored in the project than we used to have whilst introducing some concrete levels at the top of the tower. Also having the top floors in concrete was reassuring the fireman. Here is a quick comparison of 3 of the main buildings in the district. On the right-hand side, you have the co-working, which is designed by Bruneseau Spinelli. In the middle, Seine Tower with Jay Associates, and B1D1 with both Hardel and Bihan. And Youssef Tomé, you can see the spread of timber, and the 2 on the left that we already discussed, and the one on the right, co-working, is all timber apart from the primary structure, vertical cores, and obviously slabs above the peripheric, the ring road, where we have strong fire constraints with a 4-hour fire rating to achieve. As I was discussing earlier on, we have a very strong and fire regulation in France. It has very good fire safety track records, but it's basically designed to make buildings in high-rise in concrete with a fire rating of 2 hours, sorry, between compartments, and also it's limiting the fire potential within the compartments below 2 hours. So basically, within 2 hours, the fire self-extinguishes, which means the building will remain stable and has infinite fire stability over time because no fire can extend beyond 2 hours. Now, to achieve bringing timber in the project, in a high-rise, despite the regulation, we had to think out of the box and bring the timber out of the box, which means putting the timber between the compartments. CLT slabs are placed between the compartments, encapsulated on the top by screeds, concrete screeds. It could be done also with dry boards, fire-rated boards. And underneath you have flocking paste, which is also fire-rated 2 hours. On top of that, on the tallest building, mainly above 50 meters high, the firemen insisted to have sprinklage. So it's not mandatory, but the doctrine is being built at the moment with the firemen. It's not a nationwide regulation applying everywhere. It's basically on the appreciation of the firemen and the fire services. Just to give you a current state of height thresholds, we've discussed the 50-meter high already. We have a 28-meter high, which is 92 feet tall threshold to distinguish standard regulation for office and public. The same threshold applies for housing beyond 50 meters, which is 164 foot high. Beyond 50 meters, then you switch to, for all programs, to high rise. And the constraints basically, as you can see at the bottom of the diagram, increase. The lower the lowest you are, the more timber you can put and the more exposed you can be. The cores, as you go up, have to contain more concrete and more encapsulation, and also the sprinklage has to becomes more mandatory as you go high. So there is a real threshold around 50-meter high. Why are we doing that? Obviously, the timber is becoming less and less visible in the projects in France if you rely on the doctrines being built at the moment with firemen and the industry. It's obviously for the average carbon footprint we're working on. An average Parisian has nearly 12 tons per inhabitant per year footprint, of which 3 tons are due to the building. We're dividing that by 5. There were discussions about factor 4. We're actually applying factor 5 to the project in Bruneseau and bringing down the building part to 0.6 ton per inhabitant per year. You may see here it's less visible, but we're working also on the other aspects of the footprints by favoring within the project and program and the way it's organized, new ways to deal with food waste and mobility. For example, we're introducing a smart green in the project. I just wanted to give you as well a quick perspective on the use of timber in new buildings in France. We're doing very high performance building, but we have to remember in France that the new build is only 1% of the built environment. So everything we do, however performance it is, it has a very limited impact on our environment and the overall footprint, carbon footprint of the country. The other aspect of that is the timber is between 15 to 20% of the projects we are building. So the impact is even less than that. It's progressing. Timber is still an exception, but there is a huge timber and carbon-focused turn happening in public-driven projects consultations. The height of the building has an impact as well. We can see the high-rise in general, not only timber, is an exception as well in constructions in the urban fabric in France. So it's really about urban habitat in terms of impact on the environment in France. I think it's pretty much the same in Miami, apart from the CBDs. So we are getting denser and denser cities now by building buildings around 50 meter high, but the high-rise beyond 50 meters is really the exception. Just going back to the 2050 carbon neutral trajectory in France, I'm not going to develop that because Ariane has already discussed about it, about the commitments taken by France and the city of Paris. It has a huge impact through bringing targets that all the developers, architects and design teams have to achieve, mainly through the high performance E+, C- experimental targets leading to RE 2020, which is the newer environmental regulation. This requirement actually leads what we can do and what we can maintain through the project, despite all the obstacles we face with the timber in high-rise mainly. Just summing up the presentation or going back to obstacles and means and methods. First, the obstacles to the use of timber in tall buildings in France. Obviously the cost, which is proportional to timber volume used. The technical and structural, we've already discussed or very quickly about some of the aspects, technical and structural, we face with timber the bracing, the load, all the interfaces we have between different parts of the buildings, which are very different in timber and concrete, which is the usual and standard way to build in France. The building norms and practice standards. For example, you take a product sheet and you want to use it. The product has been tested for concrete. All the interfaces are made for that. So when you put timber in the equation, basically you have to think or rethink all the interfaces. Has a huge impact on the amount of studies and demonstrations you have, or the studies you have to bring. Fire regulation are not up to the game yet. Firemen are discovering the use of timber. It's more about risk, and it brings us to a psychological and cultural appreciation of the risk. And therefore, the doctrines are being built on that more than science at the moment. We have also to discuss about insurance issues, which could affect developers, designers, contractors, and owners. As soon as the risk is perceived as different for the insurance, the fees will probably develop as well. Private property and right of ownership, I've discussed that, but it had an impact on Bruneseau Seine on one of the projects, because it's only because we had to maintain the overall carbon footprint balance that, for example, Tour Seine, the Seine Tower, could remain entirely in timber. On the opposite, the B1 D1 Tower, we could switch some of the housing, the accessible housing, the accession housing, in concrete. So this one is really, really important as an argument, as an obstacle. Water damage management as well for housing is really important. Sprinklage as a response, and also all the damages that can happen through the use of water in housing is a big issue. As waste fire is a big risk, happening less often. Water is a small risk, but happening more often. So we really have to deal with this one because it could have great impact in terms of how we can deal with encapsulated timber structure and timber slabs. Now, just a quick word on means and methods used to overcome, sorry for the mistake in methods, used to overcome or set back the obstacles. Architectural value is of importance to us. We don't want just to be behind all the constraints, and architecture has a value in demonstrating, making the timber and high rise of any building work, whether it's visible or invisible, and supported only by sustainable performance. The bell shoulder straps and parachute is a French expression, which basically translates in encapsulation, sprinklage, and additional fire strategies. Basically, as there is little evidence and feedback on fire behavior in buildings, the fireman basically requests all kinds of protections and additional fire strategies beyond what is used usually. Engineering and design innovative solutions, the thinking out of the box, I'm not going to develop on that, already discussed. Encouraging scale 1 fire tests to back up full digital fire engineering. Right now we are doing fire engineering, full digital and fire engineering, but it really needs to be backed by scale 1 to come out of the interpretation or impression or psychological appreciation of risk. And we need to bring science back in the debate and to build regulation on top of that. Hopefully there is a more international sharing of experience. That's why we are contributing here to the presentation. So sharing of experience and progress with CTBUH members. Honestly, when we joined the CTBUH, and we've come to the forum a few years ago, we really hope to find some feedback and experience on the subject, because we felt quite lonely just facing ourselves with the high-rise French regulation. There was absolutely no precedent to this, so we had to build strategies and face all the issues to reinsure the clients, reinsure the firemen and all the services about putting timber and high-rise. The conclusion to that for us is lobbying through contribution to regulation. We are contributing to medium height regulation writing right now to promote and favor the mixed use in the buildings and the use of timber as well. Anything of that couldn't work without a mandatory strong energy plus and carbon minus political objectives set, which is basically supported by social and political agendas. So as a conclusion, whilst timber might not necessarily be visible, it's definitely rising. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philippe, for this great presentation, and congratulations for pushing the boundaries. I think it deserves to be mentioned. So thank you so much again. So I will now turn it to Miami. We're going to cross the ocean and land in Miami, and go to University of Miami and the lab that's been run by Christophe Meyer, AIA. Chris is an assistant professor at University of Miami School of Architecture, and is the director of the LU lab there. Chris is a Master of Architecture from the Graduate School of Design of Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is a professional degree from the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Chris is also joined today by Shawna Meyer, AIA. She's a lecturer at the University of Miami School of Architecture as well, and project coordinator and research development lead in the LU lab. Shawna earned her Master of Architecture from University of Minnesota College in Design in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Studies at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas. In addition to their academic roles, they are also running a Atelier May, an actual practice interested in confronting the circumstances of the built environment. So with that, I will leave it to Chris and Shawna to take us to what you guys are doing for timber in the Miami area.
Thank you for that introduction. So also thank you to Christophe and Santiago, along with the CTBUH for the invitation to talk today. The presentations that we just saw from Ariane and Philippe were great, and I'm happy to be presenting at the tail end of them. As mentioned, Beauchamp and I are engaged in academics and in practice. I don't want to reintroduce ourselves here, but what I would like to say is that we are excited to be here today to present a short talk here about the strategies for wood for Miami's first CLT building. So the LU Lab is an armature for research and applied knowledge for the School of Architecture, seen in this chart. It is important to note the University of Miami is committed to building knowledge and research that addresses urban resilience for the built and natural environments. This is an agenda that falls firmly on the shoulders of the discipline of architecture. The LU Lab's focus is on the role of performative criteria to inform design directives, asking the question, how do we build? So our mission in some ways here wrapped up in some of these bullet points. We acknowledge the responsibility our discipline has as the curator of the built and subsequently the natural environment. There are serious questions we need to address with respect to energy consumption, material extraction, and use, along with the environmental load displacement questions that are arising out of the mass timber movement. Architecture has been defined as the balance between art and science, as Philippe mentioned in his presentation. The LU Lab believes the need to shift the focus that engages science aspects of architecture. Our group is interested in the performative approach to design.
And following up on some of the ideas that Ariane presented, why resiliency in South Florida? This is sort of a focused diagram similar to what she shared, that South Florida is the global nexus for high velocity hurricane zone events and dynamic building environments. So it poses the question, what should building in this dynamic and spontaneous environment look like? So without question, we are a vulnerable city, both economic and environmentally. Predictions of increased storm activity, frequency, and severity grow. The projection for sea level rise place large areas of the Miami metropolis in varying states of flooding. Increased temperatures place our communities at risk, and changing environmental characteristics threaten the balance of the critical natural ecologies of the region. It is clear we need to be proactive in building a better environment and take responsibility for the role of building and construction in a global carbon condition. So how are we doing this work? In 2019, the LU Lab received a Wood Innovations Grant from the U.S. Forestry Service titled All That Is Solid, Platforms for Wood Innovation, aimed at engaging the U.S. Forestry Region 8, which is here in the Southeast. This is the first Wood Innovations Grant awarded in the state of Florida, but hopefully not the last. The project is to build a wood culture in Southern Florida that expands the use of wood and wood products in Florida. We're working with to connect all the groups working with or on wood, including institutions, industrial partners, manufacturing, policymakers, development, construction, design, engineering, and students to share the growing body of knowledge on wood. The intent of this grant work is to work together to bring wood out of the forest and into our buildings here in Southern Florida.
So our grant objectives, just want to be really clear about this. We are aiming to distribute and develop regional wood educational platforms. This is very, very important for the grant. A foundational principle of this grant is to do educational outreach. We are promoting networking between forest to market supply chains. We believe the supply chains that are linking the Southeastern region, both in terms of their material ecologies and building needs, is very important. We are also looking at regional issues with disaster relief assistance and how potentially homegrown solutions using our resources here can help solve that. And then we are looking at these kind of cross connection between academic, manufacturing, and professional organizations that can share knowledge to advance these practices. This will show up here in the presentation we are providing you today regarding how we got the first project in South Florida. We have to thank, again, this is a very, very important task on our part, is to continually bring up these partners. So we want to thank the U.S. Forestry Department at the national level for supporting a conversation continually over the past, 10, 15 years with some of their programs. Without that, we would be probably much different off here in the United States. So what is important about our work in South Florida is that the LU Lab, as an academic center, if you will, is positioned at the intersection of academia, industry, and practice. We work to develop research and then collaborate with our industrial partners to apply and realize that research. This brings us to our talk title, which is the Strategies for Wood, the first CLT structure in Miami. Now, before we get into that, as we were preparing this presentation, we found a quote from the early days of the CTBUH addressing an important question. What is a tall building? So as a portion of the outcome entangled in this debate, a distinction was made. The important criterion is whether or not the design is influenced by some aspect of tallness. Our current projects are not directly addressing things that are tall, nor are our outcomes able to be measured in meters, but instead we believe we are working on issues that are fundamental criterion in mind, the influence of tallness.
So can you build structures with cross-laminated timber panels or CLT in Miami and Miami-Dade County? This simple question has opened up a conversation that touches every spectrum of contemporary mass timber and solid wood architectural processes, interpreting and applying local codes, building logistics, manufacturing, material science, trade coordination, and structural design and tectonics. So the quick answer to this question is yes, maybe, but our job was to figure out the how. So looking at the LU Labs model, we created an academic practice-based partnership with Atelier May Architects to realize the first CLT building in Miami and put these ideas to the test. A quick look at the permitted project. The structure is a single-family residence in the Coconut Grove neighborhood in the southern end of Miami. The project is modest in both scale and budget, with an aim to uncover and test the processes of integrating new methods of construction and material assemblies into our community of building trades. As this is a presentation for the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, the importance of the project is in its impact on building permitting and policies related to construction in Florida. As Chris mentioned, the tallness of the project is the foundation it is constructing for the permitting and approval for advanced building materials and assemblies within wood architecture. The proposition for and ultimately the construction of tall wood buildings will require engagement in a similar set of processes, requiring answers to a similar set of questions as the single family residence. So what were those questions, and really breaking down the code? If we begin looking at the state level at the Florida Building Code, we can happily say that the Florida Building Code 7th edition 2020 includes the definition of CLT as a building product, as well as its regulating standard. So what does this mean? It means that when we start the conversation with code officials, and again, I think what's important for us to reiterate is here in Miami, we're really starting at the beginning. You know, the city of Miami code officials and the Miami-Dade County code officials, many of them had never heard of CLT or had been to, you know, any kind of educating events yet to understand how does it work structurally? How does it work as a material? What is it even? So the fact that the Florida Building Code now addresses it did give us a good starting ground that we could talk about the specific product that we were proposing to use, SmartLam NA V3 PRG 320 CLT panel, which is a mouthful, but it's super critical. And so what that means is that specific product is regulated under the PRG 320. It's defined as a dimensional lumber. It's even specified how it's identified. So when it's manufactured and ships out of the plant and comes to the site, all of these processes that are typical to products but foreign to the code reviewers, we could sort of identify and locate within that certification. So that was huge. And then as we look closer to Miami-Dade County, many of you may be aware that there's a high velocity hurricane zone code. And what this is, and I actually, not being a Miami native, found this fascinating that before the year 2000, the state of Florida did not have a state building code. And so after, you know, 1993 Hurricane Andrew, which was pretty devastating, the county itself and the city of Miami led sort of this global initiative to define these high velocity hurricane zone codes. Now, when the state code was adopted, Miami-Dade said, okay, but we're still going to keep this overlay. So Miami-Dade is unique to the rest of the US and maybe globally in terms of having this code. And within that, there were two conditions that we needed to provide equivalency for. So the first one is a large missile impact test. And of course, because CLT is an emerging product here in the US and it hadn't been built with before, there wasn't the specific test conducted for CLT. So with our partner, Jeff Peters of Woodworks, we submitted a US forestry test looking at CLT as a tornado shelter, which conducted a more stringent impact testing than the test required by the HVHZ in Miami-Dade County, and this was approved. And it would also set the standard to just be approved in terms of meeting 1626.2 for all CLT in the future. I should reiterate that we were 3-ply, so anybody using 5-ply or 7-ply won't have an issue either. The next condition was a wet-dry cyclical testing. And again, this is found in the HVHZ section of the code. And so it's very specific to Miami-Dade, and it's a very specific test. And again, we had not conducted that test. None of the manufacturers had. The purpose of this test is to verify the durability and structural integrity of wood-based structural composite lumber and panels designed for dry use applications when they are exposed to cyclic moisture conditions. So as many of you may be familiar, the way that the CLT panels dimensional lumber is designed and operates is that the glue is actually stronger than the wood itself. And so while we tried to negotiate an avenue where we said we don't need this test because this test is typically applied to like LVL or PSL, you know, and more composite lumbers, they said, well, you're using glue in this structural system, and so we need to know if the glue is going to fail after a wet-dry cycle. So we said, okay, well, let's look at the glue then. So we look closer at the adhesive. You can go to the next slide. And what we learned is that the adhesive manufacturers, they produce their adhesive for both Canada and the US. And so while the US didn't have a specific testing requirement, Canada does. So we were able to, and the manufacturer, of course, wants to supply their product to both Canada and US. So we were able to work and understand what this CSA 0112.12 code said for the adhesives. And what we discovered was that within that, there's a vacuum pressure treatment where they fully soak, a sample, and then there's a boil, dry, freeze treatment. So the testings with this glue and the wood were quite extensive and actually more stringent than the wet, dry, cyclical test, which basically means, you have a panel and you like spray water on it from the outside for about 15 minutes, you let it dry a day, you do it again. So we were able to work with the manufacturer and obtain those testings. So what does that mean? How was the acceptance accomplished? So again, Henkel is the glue manufacturer for the cross-laminated timber product. And we were working specifically with the Smart Lam timber product, and we were able to provide those specifications to get a one-time approval and then move forward with the City of Miami onto many of the other problems that we had to work with. But that's a little bit into the weeds, but we wanted to be specific on some of the codes.
Yeah, we're also, want to apologize for any of the kind of heavy code numbers that might not be applicable internationally, but just to kind of show the hurdles that we're working with here in South Florida relative to getting timber into what we might define here as like the last frontier for mass timber construction in an urban environment. I would say that without the team members that are listed here, it would have been a very difficult process to put all of this information together. We want to thank them for helping support us in this endeavor, gathering information across many different spectrums, including academics and institutional knowledge, as well as manufacturing, also construction, design, and engineering. All of those things came together to help us communicate effectively and clearly with Miami-Dade County Building Regulations and Permitting Office. If it wasn't for that, it would have been a very uphill battle to work through the process that they're requesting of these type of building materials for South Florida. We want to say right before we close here, so what are the next steps? What does it really mean? And again, this is looking back at that kind of prompt that we threw out here of like the tallness, if you will. So we know that there are some things that are going to be important for the future, and that will be the work that we still have left to do, which is working directly with manufacturers within Region 8. There are now 2 coming online to develop cross-laminated timber panels and trying to get those products in those organizations, institutions, certified NOA product certifications. Now that will allow for them to engage actively in the construction markets here in South Florida. The other thing that we are working again on through the grant and other endeavors are education. So for us, we have to educate on what it means to go multi-story for South Florida, for our building officials, the construction trades, all of those things that are kind of new here. Again, the apertures and detailing are very important and critical in the HV8Z zone. And so we're looking at educational material that helps understand what that looks like when it's not a concrete-based structural system. And then again, fireproofing, which you've heard twice before us. So again, fireproofing is another one of those things that is a hurdle that maybe escapes a little bit of the single-family residence. So we're able to kind of push some of those ideas through at the single-family residence as the building of a foundation for the kind of taller structures to make their way into South Florida. With that, we want to thank you for your time this afternoon and look forward to hopefully any questions you might have.
Thank you, Shawna and Chris, for this great presentation, and hopefully you guys will be able to continue pushing and build taller and taller in South Florida in the coming months and years. Thank you so much for this presentation again. And I think with that, I think we're reaching a little bit past the hour, so I just want to be opening the floor now to some questions. If there are any questions in the chat, Santiago.
We do have one question here that's very interesting, and I'm going to open this up to the panel. There was a recent museum fire in Austria of a motorcycle museum, and the question postulates what, and if any, change in your position on CLT from this event.
You're on mute, Ariane. I don't know if Philippe, you heard about this project, or you have any?
No, I haven't heard.
I mean, I can tell you our position on it is the fires and things like this are going to be hurdles that we have to overcome. And yes, they are they can be very traumatic and have casualties with them. But in the end game, what we have to do is continue with our focus on making sure that timber is a solution, wood is a solution, because the greater kind of context is actually an environmental crisis that we are getting ready to embark on. The fire does change our minds in terms of how we go about making sure those designs are set up to be much more effective in stopping those things from spreading. And they are going to set up policies and procedures of how we design buildings in the future, but it cannot slow down or halt the development of the wood agenda as it needs to maintain its momentum right now. And it will have to find ways to overcome some of these obstacles, which are fire related. There's no doubt about it.
But we have no idea what the detailing of that building was. So.
Correct. There's a lot of things that are more than likely going to be kind of specific to that structure, but we just want to make sure that stuff like this doesn't kind of erode at or kind of halt research and initiatives that are going into the structures of mass timber and solid wood architecture.
Just to add one more comment too, I think it's similar to the question that we get a lot of time here in Miami that has to do with termites. So termites are an issue. Termites are an issue in subtropical environments in southern Florida, and we're not going to propose that we have a solution. Now, we are working with researchers at Mississippi State to understand, that are specifically studying termites in southern yellow pine, in CLT, and their behavior. So if we can outline a series of strategies, that anticipate and work to prevent these scenarios, just like any good design, that's what we have to do. And I think it's the same approach, with fireproofing.
Thank you.
On our side, I'm sorry, but we haven't heard about this fire and this museum here in France. I don't know, Philippe, if you have heard anything about that. Is it sure? No, you haven't. It's sure that fire is an issue, and we have lots of, this is what Philippe was underlining, lots of discussion with the fire brigades in France for each building design in wood. It's really a subject that is very carefully considered. Now that said, we are putting all these solutions together with crossing all of them, sprinklage, encapsuled panels. For instance, Sensation in Strasbourg, they had to, at the last minute, and maybe Christophe, change and cover all the entrance hall because they wanted to have the wood visible. They did everything really to protect and be in best condition for the delivery of the building, so that safety will be carefully considered. Fire can be happening in every type of construction. So for sure, it's a pity, but we believe that wood construction are really surveyed, so that if it happens, it will for sure. But it is organized so that it will happen, hopefully with no major damage.
Okay. Take a couple more questions, Santiago, and then.
All right, so we have another question here. How difficult was it to produce CLT material for the test house in Miami? And we're looking at large-scale projects in Miami. Are you guys looking at other large-scale projects in Miami?
Obviously, that's going to be aimed at us, so we'll try to address that head on. In terms of the manufacturing, obtaining panels, there's a manufacturer located in Dothan, Alabama, which is great for the southeastern region. That facility is SmartLam North America. They also have another manufacturing plant in Columbia Falls, Montana. We have been working with them directly on their product, and they have been working in the region to get buildings constructed. They have built buildings out of that plant. And so the kind of getting panels for them is not an issue. It's actually very helpful from the standpoint that they're located in America, because they are going through procedures and manufacturing criterion that allowed us to have documentation to come to our city and code officials and show them how things were tested so that they could all get on board.
Like specifically the PRG 320. So some of the other manufacturers that may not be geared towards building in the US may not have those certifications. So that's definitely, you can always attempt to do the path of equivalency. And I know it's obviously been done throughout the US, but I would say here, just having that certification is a good starting point.
I think the other thing to note here is when you go through the path of equivalence within the kind of process for planning and zoning and permitting. In South Florida, what you are essentially doing is extending time frame. And so it can be a very slow and arduous process that's not necessarily defined in terms of how you're going to get from point A to point B, meaning that if any development or structure lands on the desks of the permitting office, they have the right to kind of go through that as they see fit to make sure the structures that are built here are not going to suffer catastrophic failure. And it is on them to say yes or no to them. So you have to be really clear in communicating those ideas and testings records to them so that they can make those evaluations.
And I don't know how it is in Paris, but I'm interested to know, but I know in our sort of 8-month approval process, lumber prices tripled. So there's definitely a cost effect on our end. So I'd like to hear from the other side what's going on.
Before there was one other section that, are we pursuing larger scale buildings? The answer to that question is yes. And we're trying to address that in the tallness portion. I mean, playing off a little bit of the kind of CTBUH history, but we're trying to address the tallness aspect with that down here. But to get a large scale building through the permitting process would require an enormous amount of time and effort. And we believe that a case study house done helps the permitting offices get comfortable with what is out there and these particular building components and assembly, so that the next time it shows up, it's not necessarily starting from zero.
Just on the French side, to respond to your question, we do see an impact on the price of CLT as the demand is rising significantly. We also see a difference or rise in price on the encapsulation products as well. And it's interesting because now it brings almost to a balance the cost difference between encapsulation and sprinklage. So if you have the choice and you can do it, perhaps up to 50 meter high on these buildings, you do have to ask yourself the question: do you want to have the timber exposed or encapsulated? You can choose between the two systems. Beyond that, you will have to put the two in place, or it won't make a big difference. But yes, there is a progress on the market on all the products related to the usage of timber.
And for instance, when the competition were launched in Bordeaux in 2015, I think, by the mayor of Alain Juppé of Bordeaux, it was to push not only the wood as being a solution, but all the chain, the supplying chain behind. So to have more works provided on site, we had the forest, but we had no technology, and really they had to push the industry so that not only it was using the local wood, but it was also bringing knowledge coming from that we had in France for many years but not used, and coming from not to bring the wood from Austria or Spain, but really to produce it locally and put the added value also locally. So I think they pushed the whole chain very strongly, and today it has increased significantly in a very short time to avoid having wood coming from outside France. So the wood is coming from France, and the technologies are the modification and the transformation of the wood itself into CLT or other type of product in the construction chain are done here locally. It really took something like 4 or 5 years to get on track.
Thank you. Thank you guys for your time. We do have a couple more questions, but I want to open this up to after the event. We will be sharing your contact information with the attendees. And if you guys want to continue the conversation, I encourage you to reach out to each one of these panelists, and they will be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you so much for being part of this presentation today on this webinar, and I'd like to thank particularly all the panelists who took the time to share with you their experience on this particular subject, and I hope we can continue the conversation and continue to build with timber taller and taller in Florida. Thank you so much. You will find this presentation on the website after the presentation. Thank you again. You have a nice day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.